Good evening and welcome to this evening's webinar. Thank you so much for joining Baroness Harman and I. I want to say first of all that the session is being recorded. Due to the sensitivity of the subject matter, we will take a decision on whether or not we publish it once the recording has been thoroughly checked. If you have any concerns, please do contact us on equality@barcouncil.org.uk immediately after this event. The other bit of housekeeping that I want to bring to your attention is that we've received a number of questions already, but I encourage you to ask more questions. If you want to publish the question anonymously, there is a box that you should tick. I think it says send anonymously, and then you'll be able to do that. The team from the Bar Council, the EDI team, are on hand together with the Review Council. They're able to answer some of your questions online, and others will reach Harriet and I. Before I hand over to Harriet to tell us a little bit about the report, I just wanted to ground us in the context on what it is that caused the Bar Council to commission this review. The issue of bullying, harassment, and sexual harassment is an important issue, not just for me as chair of the bar, but also as a practitioner, as a joint head of chambers looking after the welfare of colleagues, because we know that experiencing or witnessing bullying, harassment, or discrimination is intrinsically linked to our personal well-being, how we feel and our role and worth at the bar, whether we stay and have a career or all underpinned by the behavior that we witness and or experience. Bullying also has an impact on our clients because as they witness it happening in court, they question whether or not their case will be dealt with fairly, and it compromises the trust in the justice system. It impacts, in addition, our work, which we collectively believe in, on equality, diversity, and inclusion. It isn't enough, in my view, to attract and encourage people to the bar from underrepresented groups only for their experience at the bar to be one where they meet out bullying and harassment. So we have that experience, but on top of it, successive results from our barristers' working life surveys indicate that bullying and harassment was becoming an intractable problem for the profession. So we had in place Talk to Spot, we had guidance, we had training, but still survey on survey, the respondents would say they had experienced or witnessed inappropriate behavior. And just for context, the survey results were as follows. In 2017, those who said in response to the barristers' working lives that they had experienced or witnessed inappropriate behavior, 31%. In 2021, that percentage had gone up to 38%, and by 2023, the figure was 44%. We know from that research that those who were more at risk of experiencing bullying and harassment and discrimination were women, people of colour, and junior members of the bar, also bar students. We also knew that those who were whose behaviour was complained about, were generally those people in positions of power and influence, judges, more senior barristers, senior clerks, and practice managers. The strains and stresses of our roles as advocates was bad enough without that overlaying. And so with all of that information in mind, last year, Sam Townend, who was in the chair, and I commissioned Baroness Harman to conduct this review. Excuse me. That review report was launched on the 8th of September. It contains, and I hope you've seen it and read it, 36 recommendations, which we can come to in a moment to break down. I'm very pleased to tell you that the Bar Council has agreed, having had a meeting with both the GMC as well as Bar Council itself last Saturday, has agreed to adopt all 36 of those recommendations. And we are to take immediate steps to implement those recommendations that apply to us. And we will start to work with the BSB, BTAS, Chambers, and the judiciary in relation to the recommendations that affect the rest of them. I will talk to you a little bit about the implementation plan towards the end of our discussions. But without further ado, I would like to, if I may, introduce you to Harriet, who very kindly agreed to commission our report to tell us something about the report. So Harriet, can you give us a bit of an overview, first of all, because before I ask you a couple of questions?
Right. Well, thanks very much indeed. And thanks to all of you who are joining us. I'm afraid I can't see you all, which is kind of quite weird, but that's the way of the world on these things. But thank you very much indeed to all of you who've joined us. And hello to those who I've seen on my visits round and about the circuits. And a particular thank you to all of those who've made submissions to the review and who've helped with providing evidence to the review. Thank you very much for doing that. So my interest in chairing this review stems really from my belief in and support for the barrister's profession. I think that our bar is incredibly important. It underpins the whole rule of law, and it's something that I think in a way we can quite easily take for granted, but actually we do have in barristers a very, very well respected legal profession. We also have a very well respected and important independent judiciary, and you just only have to look in other countries who've got not such a high quality or highly ethical barrister's profession, or have less of an independent judiciary, to see how important the bar is and the judiciary is to the whole essence of our constitution and the rule of law. So I've always had a strong commitment to the barrister's profession and the judiciary. And probably because I used to be a solicitor, I think that there is something a bit respectful in solicitors always think barristers are absolutely wonderful and know all the answers to everything. So I was delighted to be asked to help with this review. I've also got a long-standing belief in meritocracy, and that people should be able to make their contribution. And you cannot make your contribution to a profession if you're harassed, sexually harassed or bullied. And that undermines the ability of people at the bar to do their best work, and undermines the ability of the bar to attract people of the highest caliber into the bar and to maintain them at the bar. So I'm committed to meritocracy. And also because I know that sexual harassment and bullying and harassment makes people's lives a misery. And that shouldn't happen to anybody, let alone those who are wanting to work in the barrister's profession. So I hate to see anybody suffering completely wrongly and have their lives made a misery, and to feel that nothing's going to be done about it and they can't do anything about it. So I was very grateful to the bar for commissioning me to do this work, and also to selecting a reference group of a wide range of individuals. And the reference group, that the names of them is in the report if you'd like to see it. And I'd really like to thank the reference group for their incredible wisdom and support for the work of the review. I was also very well supported by my own team for the review, particularly Sam Granger, who is with the team answering the questions, the Bar Council team answering the questions. She was part of Speaker's Council team in the House of Commons, and also was the counsel to the Joint Committee on Human Rights, which I chaired. So I was very grateful to her working with me as counsel to the review. I would also say that I have worked with a lot of organisations over the years. You know, I was an MP for more than 40 years. And I really do think that I can't think of another organisation who I have found so easy to work with in terms of clarity of approach, professionalism, commitment. So I'm just want to say, I think you're incredibly well served by the Bar Council team. And I'd like to name check Malcolm Cree, who's the chief executive, and particularly the Equality and Diversity team, Sam Mercer and Rachel Chris. I've really found such professionalism. I also found a great willingness for people in the circuits, in the specialist bar associations and individual barristers, a great willingness to engage in the review. But I also found people saying, well, I'm so glad you're doing this review. Thank you so much for taking it on. And I'm so glad that the Bar Council have set it up. But, you know, nothing's going to change because it's the bar, and think that nothing's going to change. And I think that that's something to bear in mind at this point, is that I do feel that there is a sort of sense that there does need to be change and a commitment to make that change. But we have to, I think there has to be confidence given to those who feel that nothing can be changed because the bar is such a traditional institution. I think what I found was some of the things which are the bar's great strengths are also the reasons why harassment, sexual harassment and bullying have been able to continue. For example, it's a very traditional, long-standing, you know, proudly traditional profession, but sometimes it's hard to make change in something which has got such deep historical roots. It's much easier, you know, if you're in a startup and you're all sitting on bean bags and you've got no protocols and background, it's easier to make change in that sort of organization. So it's hard to make change in a traditional organization. I think it's hard to tackle problems of bullying, harassment and sexual harassment when you've got very much a hierarchy. I mean, you need a hierarchy, obviously. You've got to have new pupils arriving in the profession, and you've got to have people with masses of experience right at the top of the profession. But that obviously gives rise to a power imbalance. And when there's a power imbalance, that makes it difficult to tackle harassment, bullying and sexual harassment. I also think that the bar is very mutually supportive within chambers and out on circuits, especially circuits out of London, where it's quite a small network, which can be incredibly supportive, mutually supportive. But I think those networks can also be networks which people feel will be mutually supportive at the expense of anybody who's got a justified complaint, that people will pull together and that anybody who complains will be regarded as a troublemaker. I think when it comes to bullying, the adversarial nature of our legal system, which is incredibly important, is used by some as a pretext to flip over into bullying. And I think you can perfectly rightly have an adversarial system which really interrogates the evidence and interrogates the law, but that does not amount to bullying. So, for example, I really, one judge mentioned to me and said, well, it's an adversarial system if your opponent has a weak evidence base, you have to attack the evidence. If your opponent has a weak legal argument, you have to attack the legal argument. If your opponent and your advocate on the other side is a weakling, you have to attack them. Now, I would say that is wrong. That is bullying. You know, certainly challenge the evidence, challenge the law, but don't attack the advocate. I also think that there is a lot of support for and deference to the judiciary. And the bar is very committed to the judiciary. And I think that because there's so much respect for the judiciary, sometimes it's and because there is very much a hierarchy, and the judiciary are in charge in their own courts, it's very difficult to, if the judge is bullying, to find a way in that hierarchy to challenge that bullying. And I think that sometimes those at the top of the judiciary, they're not necessarily told, you know, WhatsApp groups are bound with information about particular judges in particular court centres where there's a problem with bullying, but it doesn't necessarily get through to those at the top in such a way that they can do something about it. So that's, I think, a little bit of a background to my taking on this review and to the way I went about it and the evidence I received. And I'm very happy to go through with you, Barbara, the questions that have been posed.
Sure. I think before I do that, Harry, if you don't mind, again, a little bit for context, I hope that everybody's read your report, but in case they haven't, I mentioned a moment ago that you have, having undertaken a comprehensive review, received almost 200 submissions. And when we say that, that's not a small number because, as you said, you spoke to and liaised intensively with Specialist Bar Association. So, for example, when you received the submissions from the CBA, who we know set up a working group, you were hearing from those almost 4,000 members who say they are members of the CBA. So I think we need to be clear about that. But just going to your recommendations, 36 of them, I will, if I may, just group them up so that there is some understanding. So the first 4 deal with the code of conduct, and you suggest there needs to be greater clarity around the BSB's code of rules and mandatory anti-harassment bullying policies and training to be put in place, to seek clarification on the scope of professional misconduct. You then at 5 to 8 set out handling of complaints and requiring a guide to the complaint process, clarity around the Bar Council's use of talk to spot records and so on. Then there are recommendations directed to the duty to report serious misconduct, no place for the innocent bystander, as it were. We all have a role to play here. Recommendation 11, protection of safeguarding of students, mini pupils and pupils, which proposes proper procedures for work experience and serious misconduct in relation to sexual relationships. There are 5 recommendations that deal with the handling of complaints and the processes around there. There are recommendations looking at the tribunal process. You propose there should be regulatory action in relation to online bullying and abuse. 3 or 4 recommendations directed towards sanctions and proposing significant sanctions to operate as a deterrent. And you would like to see, and we accept, that there should be real consequences in terms of career progression in relation to those who are found to have been bullied. And then you deal with judicial bullying. There are 5 recommendations where you propose that the judiciary consider taking certain steps, including a revision of the JCIA complaint system. And finally, and most importantly, you recommend that the Bar Council appoint a commissioner for standards. So that's a real range of recommendations there, which is starts from the beginning. What is bullying? Define it, make it a disciplinary offence, and all the way through how we deal with it. It's interesting, though, having conducted this comprehensive review, you spoke to people across circuits and received all of those submissions, that you were told, as I have been told several times, that, well, what's the point? Will it work? This is the bar. So how optimistic are you that there will be change when so many still are naysayers who deny that there's a problem?
Well, I do feel optimistic because it was the Bar Council itself that commissioned this review. Mostly reviews into this sort of thing are precipitated by some particular terrible scandal, so an organisation feels forced into it, or a review is imposed on it from government or from outside. But this was a review which you yourself commissioned because of the evidence that you yourself had collected. So I think that that shows that there was already an understanding of the scale and nature of the problem and a commitment to address it. So I think that that makes me feel very positive and optimistic about that. I think that it's very much down to the barristers' profession, all of you independent and employed barristers, yourself, whether or not this is implemented. And I think it's not just a question of the individual that needs to be protected from all these measures, but the actual reputation of the bar itself. Because we've seen, haven't we, many institutions, you only need to think of the churches, whose reputation has been indelibly stained by failing to deal with things when a scandal erupts and it just then rolls on. And I think that what the Bar Council is doing is actually not only wanting to be protective of individuals to enable them to pursue their career at the bar, but also protecting the reputation of the bar to make sure that it has the high ethical standards that everybody should adopt and that everybody wants to see. So I think it's very much down to individuals at the bar to think what this review is trying to do. And what it's trying to do is protect individuals and also protect the reputation of the bar. And I think it's worth people thinking that when they hear somebody saying, oh, it was bad in my day, but it's much better now, often those individuals are people who have been at the bar for decades and who are in a more serious position, a more serious senior position. And the truth is that you are less likely to be bullied or sexually harassed if you are in a senior position and you're older. And I think that for anybody who's about to say, who's in a senior position, oh, it was bad when I was young, but it's all right now, is I would say, think again before you actually say that, because what you're then doing is denying what the experiences that you're being told about by younger members of the bar, that this problem subsists. And you might not have seen it yourself, you might not have experienced it ever or in the last few decades, but it is happening, and it's wrong when it happens, and action needs to be taken. So I think that there needs to be a good looking in the mirror of everybody who's about to think that they might be against making these changes, because there needs to be a recognition. The second point I'd make is that the bar is notably independent minded, and everybody thinks for themselves, and that's part of what people are trained to do, and the bar is steeped in independent thinking. But I think that I would say that I think the Bar Council have done a huge amount of thinking and are there to fight for good rules for the profession and good protections for the reputation of the profession. And that I think that you can be reassured that you can let the Bar Council get on with this on their behalf and support them doing this on your behalf, rather than actually having, hundreds and hundreds of different views about how you go forward on this. I don't want to just say, blindly trust the leadership of the Bar Council and let them get on with it on your behalf. But I do think that they have shown great professionalism and commitment on this and thought about every single aspect of it. And for change to be made, there needs to be a momentum for change and for people to support that change. So I would urge individual members of the bar to support the Bar Council to make these changes, and not to minimise the problem if they haven't experienced it, or challenge every single proposal that's put forward. I'm sure that everything will always be kept under review once it's implemented, but I think there has to be change made, because otherwise not only will individuals suffer, but ultimately the reputation of the bar is in jeopardy.
Yeah, I'm not at all surprised that we should get that as a first question. How optimistic are you that there will be change? It's what people have said to me as well. But I am optimistic. I'm optimistic for all the reasons that you set out, that we've commissioned this and that we're driving it through. I'm optimistic because most of the people who have made contact with me have done so in order to say, thank goodness for the report. I'm optimistic because those who are responsible for driving change in this area, the other stakeholders, not only engaged with the review from the outset, but have also indicated, having received your report, that they intend to engage with us and with the Commissioner to implement change. I'm also optimistic because there is real appetite for change as far as the Bar Council leadership is concerned. I can give absolute assurance to colleagues that this is not a report that will sit on a shelf and gather dust. We are already putting steps in place, having received the go-ahead from the Bar Council on Saturday, to start the bits that we have to do and to engage very carefully and soon with the other stakeholders. I'm optimistic because within a day of your report, the Four Inns indicated that they're going to form a working group. And I can go on. In other words, they're naysayers. You know, I've also had one or two people make contact with me to say, is it really that bad? Should bullying really be career ending? It's really interesting because that particular person spoke to me, didn't just text, actually called. And by the end of the conversation, she had been persuaded that in fact, this issue, bullying, harassment and sexual harassment, was already ending careers, only it was the careers of the women. And so to your point in the report, that the jeopardy has to shift. And for as long as the jeopardy sits with the victim, the complainant, then nothing changes, right? So nothing changes if nothing changes. We have the appetite to change things. So my optimism is based on what I've experienced so far as I talk about this debate. So great. Another question we've had through, not surprisingly, is about judicial bullying. In fact, we've had several just come through in relation to judicial bullying. The first is, what advice, Harriet, do you have for a victim of bullying by a judge?
Right. Well, look, thank you for that question. And I have to say that in all the circuits that I went round, this issue was raised. And it doesn't serve the interests of justice for a judge to be bullying barristers. You know, how can that help the evidence be brought forth? How can that help the legal arguments to be put? It actually cuts against the interests of justice. And there is a difference between proper case management and conduct of a case and bullying. And I think that I found at the bar in relation to this issue about this report, very good engagement from all aspects of the specialist bar associations, as you say, the young bar and the circuits, and individual barristers. Everybody was very open to talking to me, and there was very good engagement. I think that the judiciary are very fiercely independent, and rightly so, but I don't think that should then extend to not being able to listen to people outside the judiciary who are telling them that they've got a problem. And you'll see the engagement that I had with the judiciary at the outset of the review in the emails that were exchanged between me and the judiciary when I sought to discuss with them the review and to hear from them. I think that there is undoubtedly a problem of judges bullying barristers. And I think there's a number of things that will address this. Firstly, the judicial leadership. I think that they need to be absolutely clear that they recognise there is a problem and make a public acknowledgement that there is a problem and a public commitment to addressing it. They haven't done that yet, but I hope that they will actually do that. And then there are a number of specific measures. For example, audio recordings, where there is an audio recording in court, that should be available to the barristers as of right on request. It shouldn't have to be that you have to apply to the judge in order then to hear those audio recordings. A barrister might want to listen to the audio recordings to just think, well, was I being oversensitive, or was it really the case that this was bullying? They might want to listen back in order to decide whether they've got a complaint. Those audio recordings might then form the basis of a complaint. So I think that it's important that there should be audio recordings. I mean, we're not talking about family courts or, you know, when the court's sitting in private, obviously, but audio recordings, I think, are important. And certainly our experience in the House of Commons is that when people know that what they have been saying and how they've been saying it is potentially going to be shared, they behave much better. You know, scrutiny makes standards much higher. So I think audio recordings is very important indeed. I think the fact that there is a 3-month time limit, I don't know whether everybody on this webinar knows this, but there is a 3-month time limit for complaints to about the judiciary. I mean, you might be in the middle of a case that won't end within 3 months, and therefore you'd be, if you waited till the end of the case, which you might well want to do, then you'd be out of time. So I think there's no justification for a 3-month time limit, and there should be no time limit. We know from all sorts of other areas that sometimes people take a bit of a while before they feel able to complain, but the judiciary should be encouraging complaints, not actually putting in a time limit of 3 months. I think that should go straight away. I think also talk to spot, or the equivalent of talk to spot for the judiciary, is very important indeed, because I think there is such a disincentive for individuals to actually make complaints about the judiciary, especially if there's a court centre which they appear in on a regular basis. Then it could make it feel very difficult to complain about somebody where you know you're going to have cases in front of them. But you might want to report their bullying behaviour anonymously, and then sometimes a pattern can emerge, which then the leadership can take action on. So I think talk to spots are important as well. I also think that sanctions are important. That it really is not acceptable for a bullying judge to carry on the bench, and I think there should be no excuses for that. I think the idea that, oh well, you know, judges are under a lot of pressure. I'm sure judges are under a lot of pressure, and the pressures they're under are absolutely terrible and should be addressed. But that is not an excuse or a justification for bullying. And I think that if a judge loses control of themselves in outbursts of anger and irritability, how can they be sitting in judgment on those people who are sometimes in the dock or are respondents in civil cases because they've lost control of themselves? I think that they up the reputation of the court in what they're doing. So I think sanctions are very important indeed. And I think that I suggest that in addition to the Lady Chief Justice and the Lord Chancellor deciding on sanctions where misconduct is proved, there should be an independent person as well because of the leniency of some sanctions. And I think an independent person would make sure that there was an independent view of whether this sanction was strong enough.
Yeah, look, I couldn't agree with you more, Harriet, when you say that it can't just be the fact that judges are under pressure or that the system is, the court buildings are crumbling and so on. Because if that were the case, then all judges would be bullies because they're all sitting in those conditions. I also think that we are looking at through the wrong lens when we focus on intention rather than impact on the person who is bullied. But I should also say, by way of balance, of my own personal experience of dealing with the judiciary on this subject, I have had many, many conversations with the senior judiciary, and without exception, there has been a real willingness to meet us in this space. I also know, because we were lucky enough for the Lady Chief to come to conference in Birmingham in June, and she was very clear there that she was aware of real concerns, that obviously we have to recognise independence and so on, but that there was a willingness to engage with this work. And of course, most importantly, when your report was launched on the 8th of September, we got a fulsome, supportive response almost immediately from the Lady Chief. So I have also, with the judiciary, reasons to be optimistic that the issue is front and centre for them, and that they will meet us in this space, respecting independence and so on, to effect the changes that we want. But I agree, the narrative has to shift from intention to impact, and has to shift from the conditions in which people work and so on. That there is no room for that. So I couldn't agree more. Another question we've received in relation to judicial bullying. Somebody asked, in relation to judicial bullying, what steps or measures should chambers be taking to support members to have the confidence and ability to report and or deal with such incidents? Any thoughts on that?
So I think that a sense that that it takes everybody really to work together to ensure that the senior judiciary do hear these complaints, and an encouragement and supporting of complainants. And I think that I think that chambers do have an important role. The head of chambers, as do circuit leaders. And I think, as you say, Barbara, it becomes much easier when there is a willingness from the top levels of the judiciary to ensure that there isn't bullying and harassment. I think that there is a great deal of unjustified criticism and attack on the judiciary. We all have got in mind the enemies of the people critique. Mm-hmm. And I think that the judiciary understands so well their importance, and therefore feel very defensive of the judiciary because of their absolutely essential role. But that shouldn't stop them being able to be open to recognising the problem of judicial bullying. And as you say, Barbara, they are setting themselves on that course of addressing the problem in a proper, open-minded way.
I think actually that the question as to what a chambers can do, I think one of the issues that you set out so clearly in your report is the difference between knowing it's wrong and knowing what to do about the issue. So chambers or heads of chambers, a report is made to them and they think, well, this is clearly an issue, but which lever to pull and where to go has been an issue. So hopefully the fact that your report sets out so clearly what the roadmaps are, defining bullying, steps that you can take, will be helpful. But I think this is really one of the areas where the Commissioner will come into its own, because one would hope that the chambers could lean on the Commissioner. Do you want to tell us a little bit what you had in mind in relation to the question, judicial bullying, what might chambers do, and the Commissioner?
Yes, well, as far as chambers is concerned, I mean, and also even circuit leaders, sometimes I've heard of concern about a particular judge and even a complaint being made, but even a feeling amongst quite senior people at the bar that nothing's going to be done about it, nothing's been done about it. And I think that what would be good is a collective sense of purpose, that actually, if there is, well, we all know X is just, absolutely out of control and, actually terrorizes people who appear before him or her, then that can't just be left. It can't just be, oh, it's just one of those things where everybody just grits their teeth. And I even heard from, as I put in the report, senior members of the bar who, because they're senior, are in a position to decide that they can actually not appear before a particular judge and just not take cases that would appear before them because they're not prepared to put up with that sort of behaviour. So I think that it also is something that's experienced by people who are quite senior. I think you've mentioned the proposal we've made for a commissioner for conduct for the bar, and this is a position which sits in the space before an official complaint to JCIO or the Bar Standards Board. And I think that we have to recognise that whilst there's, as you said in your introduction, Barbara, a great deal of concern that people have either experienced or witnessed bullying, harassment or sexual harassment, there is only a tiny fraction of those that actually find their way to an official complaint. And I think the trouble with relying on change being driven by official complaints is it puts the responsibility on the slight shoulders of the person who has themselves been the subject of that misconduct. And you can't expect those who are often subject to misconduct because they are more junior then to be the drivers of change in the system. So you need a powerful position of somebody who is going to be supporting those in circuit leadership, in chambers, who, as you say, might know that it's happening but not know what to do about it and need guidance. I think it's very difficult for circuit leaders. They might be have worked for many years, for chambers, heads of chambers. I think they might have worked very closely with the person who's been complained about for years. They might have be worried about the finances of the chambers if this is a high earning person. They've got their own cases to be dealing with and need to be, out there in the courts, working in their profession and earning a living. And therefore, how do they deal with these complaints? I think the commissioner will support heads of chambers who find it very, very difficult to deal with complaints. If you think of a solicitor's firm,
yes,
you've actually got
an HR department.
You've got an HR department, and you've got professionals within that HR department who are trained in how to deal with it and whose job is to deal with that sort of thing. But the structure of the independent bar is such that chambers are unregulated entities. Many of them, some of them do have HR functions, but many of them are too small to do that. And also chambers, because they're not they're not a firm or not a company, are unregulated associations, and they're therefore not regulated. So I think that some people said you'll never get this sorted out unless you get the sort of structure they have in the solicitor's profession, which is the solicitor's regulatory authority regulates the firm, and the firm has got a employment contract with the solicitors, and the SRA also regulates the solicitors. And all you have with the independent bar structure is you have the Bar Standards Board and then just to the individual barristers. So I think what you need is to put some heft in for this change, which is not about the formal complaints mechanism, which would remain the responsibility of the Bar Standards Board or JCIO, but will actually help drive this work through. To a degree, this is what the really excellent EDI department at the Bar Council has already been doing. And also there is a bit of a responsibility within the Bar Standards Board to look at what is going on in chambers, and they have this traffic light system about whether a chamber is a risk of misconduct on the basis of whether it's red, amber or green. But I don't find any confidence in that that part of the Bar Standards Board work. In fact, most people don't seem to even know they have that responsibility. So I think it would be building on the work the Bar Council does, and taking over responsibility for that part of the Bar Standards Board which is not actually dealing with official complaints. Because I think it's very important not to just establish something for the sake of it, but to make sure that you can see where resources could be drawn in and directed towards the commissioner. And I also think that the Bar Standards Board should be tougher on costs from those who are found to be guilty of misconduct. It can cost the bar hundreds of thousands of pounds, and then that is all borne by the other members of the bar, not by the person who's committed the misconduct.
Well, thank you for that. It's very clear that that there is that obvious risk, as you say, but the proportionate response is for the commissioner to be appointed as an officer of the Bar Council and sit within the officer team in the way that you set out in your report. Another question, slightly different topic, but one that has been really hotly debated since you made the recommendation, and that is, what would you say, Harriet, to those who don't think the prohibition of sexual relationships between those in power and pupils and students is a necessary step?
Okay, so thank you for whoever tabled that question. I think the best way to look at it is not a prohibition, but to look at it as that it is misconduct, serious misconduct, for somebody in a chambers to be having sex with a pupil or a mini pupil or an intern or work experience. And obviously pupilages last for 2 periods of 6 months. Now pupils are going to work in chambers to work and to progress their career at the bar. They are not there to be preyed on for sex by people in the chambers, tenants in the chambers. And the difficulty is that there is such a power imbalance because the people in who are tenants hold in their hands the ability for this person to be able to be taken on as a tenant and to be able to progress their career at the bar. And you just have to think of an example of a young woman who comes in as a pupil and then is pressurized for sex by somebody, who's a tenant, might even be, a senior person in the chambers and much older. If they rebuff them, they will fear that that will finish their career, and that the person will be so offended and annoyed and cross and embarrassed that they will then take against them and make it difficult for them to pursue their career at the bar. And I think the power imbalance is such that therefore you need to just say to those who are in the chambers, you cannot be having sex with pupils and interns. It's not to say that pupils and interns can't have sex with each other, or they could have sex with people in other chambers. But what you can't do is have the tenants in those chambers having sex with the pupils and interns in their own chambers. Now, sometimes people have said to me, a rule, a hard and fast rule, is too much. That basically there ought to be disclosure, but disclosure protects the chambers from not knowing when they come to decide on whether somebody should be taken on as a tenant, that actually somebody who's on the pupillage committee or the tenancy committee that's deciding whether to take that person on is actually having an undisclosed sexual relationship with that pupil. So it protects the chambers from somebody having a vested interest, which they don't disclose. But disclosure, how does that protect the pupil? I can't imagine anything worse than being pressurized into sex by somebody in the chambers who then declares it and discloses it. It doesn't improve the situation. It makes it infinitely worse. And I'm not in favor of just generally speaking, expanding areas of misconduct, but I've listened to every other argument about what might be done to protect young women, but also young men from being pressurized into sex. And I think they just need to be able to work in the courts, work in the chambers without having to think about this. And a prohibition means that they have the confidence of knowing this is not something they have to put up with. And those in chambers, the tenants, will know it is not something they're able to do. And if they do, it should be career ending. And there are many other walks of life where their sexual relations are prohibited. I mean, in some universities, it's misconduct for lecturers to be having sex with students. It's well known that medical doctors aren't allowed to have sexual relationships with their patients. So I just think it will just sort it out. And what is the price that will be paid by this? At the very most, the price would be that people would have to not have sexual relations for a year. But I think that something needs to happen in this way to protect those who are in a power imbalance situation. Starting out.
I think that's exactly right. I think that, so when people have raised it with me in the last couple of week or so, they often say, well, most people who come to the bar are adults by the time they get here. And so it'll be activity as between two consenting adults. And I think for me, I fully understand why you say what you say. We accept and adopt it. And I think it might be something that needs to be picked up in the training that you say is mandatory, to help people understand what a power dynamic looks like. It's often misunderstood. It's not about the age of the person. It's the difference between where the power and influence lies in one hand and the fact that they hold the keys to the other's career, and what might happen in terms of the ability to say no in those circumstances. So that needs to be clarified.
I just find that, barristers need to be incredibly intelligent people. I mean, and I think the idea that the barrister who grabs at the pupil in the back of a taxi doesn't actually know that what he's doing is unwanted or often abhorrent. I just think that they don't. It just a marker needs to be put down, and I don't think that I don't accept the argument that somehow social standards have changed. I think that those in senior positions who grope and press for sex with those in junior positions have never bothered to think about whether or not it's acceptable to the person they're pressing themselves on. And it wouldn't take long with some people doing this and then being out of the profession for everybody to work out very quickly it's just something you don't do. And I think that people understand very well that dishonesty is correct. Well, sexual predatoriness ought to be career ending as well for the person who's doing it, not for the person who's the victim of it, which is often what happens.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Back to chambers, and this time clerks. Somebody has just posed the following: great report, but no reference to bullying or harassment by clerks. How can we tackle this? Often a male senior clerk that goes unchallenged, the drinking culture, power over junior female barristers, etc. What do you say about that, Harriet?
Well, we actually had two clerks on the reference group who were both very strong in their contributions about bullying of clerks, especially junior female clerks, but also bullying by clerks. And the report does cite examples of this.
By the way, Harriet, you don't mean it, but your finger is covering your face.
Oh, right. Sorry. I'm just twirling up. Sorry, the tech here. This is noted at paragraph 63 of the report. The report refers to an example of a pupil who said her clerk demanded to sleep with her, and another pupil whose clerk told the pupils they would be dead if their attendance notes were over 24 hours late. So I think bullying and harassment by clerks who are in a position of power, particularly over younger and more junior people, we do address that. And there are a number of recommendations because this has to be a whole ecosystem. It's got to be about people who are employed in chambers, clerks and other employees, tenants, pupils, as well as the judiciary. There needs to be a whole ecosystem awareness. I mean, what we're talking is just people getting on with their job in a professional way in such an important profession. You know, we just don't want to be seeing any bullying or sexual harassment. It's all undermining of people's, the rule of law and the reason why people in the law in the first place.
Of course. And again, I think this is not only is it an ecosystem, it's also the reasons why you say that education and training is going to be so pivotal in this area to explain and set out what is what. You also say very clearly that what would help are the bullying and harassment policies that might be developed and the guidance that Bar Council might develop. And of course, once again, the Commissioner who will be able to tie all of those things, tie all of those loose ends for us. Looking at, sorry, I'm just looking for the next question. Somebody asked, what is the key thing that you think those in chambers leadership positions should be doing to drive change?
I think to see that they've got a real opportunity with the support that there will be from the Bar Council and the Commissioner to really be part of a moment where there is big cultural change and where horrible practices are rooted out and the profession is really cleansed from this sort of thing in the future. So I hope they'll see it as a very historic and honourable thing that they'll be doing to actually make the bar a better place and feel quite cause-driven about it. And also for them to know that they will get, as I say, support from the Bar Council. I mean, I think, there's a lot of responsibility on head chambers. And it's very good that the profession is prepared to do leadership in these terms and also have to do their, day job as well. And so I think that I do respect the way that heads of chambers do step forward and the difficulty that they have. But I hope that they'll see it's a historic role that they've got at this particular point in order to turn the corner. And I think that a lot of organisations have faced this same problem where they recognise they have to make institutional change. And actually, the heads of chambers are really in the pivotal position to give confidence to people that they can and should complain, and that that there is a real profession-wide determination to actually ensure that that change happens. So I think it's leadership. It comes down to leadership at Chambers level, in the same way that the Bar Council has taken a leadership role on this.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think as someone who, when not chair of the bar, is the joint head of a large set of chambers, I can say that what the report does is it sets out a helpful roadmap to how you might deal with things, which will encourage and help those in leadership and heads of chambers. I think the report, by making it so plain that the influence that the power dynamic has, might cause heads of chambers to think about how management committees are run, for example. Bringing juniors in so that they're part of the decision making might be an obvious thing. I think that a point that you make in the report that I think we ought not to forget is that there can be no such thing as NDAs to cover up bullying and harassment. So those sorts of practices where the lens and the desire is to squish the conflict and not to bring difficulties to the set of chambers, which causes those sort of behaviours. So the roadmap and what you say heads of chambers might do to make their chambers a safer place will certainly, I hope, help those who are in those leadership positions. As you say, often doing it on top of their day jobs for no money, but just for the good of chambers. So I think it's really important that they should have that help to be able to help the colleagues in their chambers.
I think you're right, Barbara, about them making a point of including in the discussions juniors, because whether they're new tenants or pupils. One of the things that quite struck me when I was on my visits around circuits, and I'm so grateful for the heads of circuits who hosted me and the chambers that hosted me and brought together groups from different levels of seniority, was that quite often I got the sense that actually it gave an opportunity for the senior members in chambers to actually be in a discussion where the junior members of chambers and pupils were talking about their experience in a way that they might not often have been able to have that opportunity. And so it was quite often where a junior person would say, and this is going on, and the senior members would go, oh, that I didn't realize that was happening. That's awful. So I think that actually to help protect against the sort of insulation that you get, the higher up the system you are, it's really important to institutionalize the engagement of those at the bottom of the profession.
Well, the great thing about these sorts of sessions, webinars, is that you get, although we can't see them, sadly, we're getting almost immediate feedback, because having said what I said about heads of chambers and the responsibilities they already have, I've just received another question in which someone says, heads, with all these additional duties being placed on the shoulders of those who already have their own practices, is the role of head of chambers becoming too much with all of these additional asks? Will we have anybody who's prepared to put their hand up to do this?
Well, I think that already now you see where there is a complaint in chambers and that chambers do feel they have to investigate it. It's incredibly difficult for the head of chambers and costs many, tens, if not hundreds of thousands of pounds. So basically, heads of chambers are already doing it, but without the support that they need to enable them to do it. So at any time, a head of chambers might face this. So it's really preventive action plus support once there is a complaint. So it should make it easier for heads of chambers, much clearer about what the boundaries are, and then much better support if a complaint arises within their chambers. So it should make it easier rather than more difficult for heads of chambers. Should
you have removed the layer of chambers-based complaints procedure? Because do they ever work? Will they ever work? Says an attendee.
Well, I think that it's really partly, it depends on the nature of the complaint, but I think that sometimes chambers are unsure whether or not it is something that should go straight to the Bar Standards Board by way of a formal complaint, or whether it is something they can do in chambers. And they have to make that decision unsupported at the moment. So I think that, yes, it is difficult for anybody who's within chambers making a complaint, especially if it's against a senior person. And that's why I think that that there's would be a skepticism and a lack of confidence that there would be genuine independence. And that's why the commissioner can help with something which falls short of a complaint to the Bar Standards Board, but something which be sort of where the complainant is not confident that the chambers themselves can deal with it. Supposing the complaint is against the head of chambers, for example. So the commissioner can help in that situation.
Sure. So sort of slightly new topic. Your report acknowledges the difficulties balancing confidentiality and transparency when investigations are afoot. And so somebody has that in mind when they say, given many barristers choose to use anonymous reporting via talk to spot, for example, and yet formal complaints often require non-anonymous evidence. How will we reconcile offering genuine anonymity? How do you keep confidentiality when investigating complaints, when subjects of complaints often are able to identify who the complainants are?
Well, I think that, that is a very, very important question. And these things are very difficult indeed. One of the things that I've suggested is that at the point at which the Bar Standards Board launches an investigation, i.e. that they've accepted that there is a complaint that needs to be investigated, referred to the tribunal, that at that point the barrister's name, who's the subject of the complaint, ought to be made, because quite often with these things, in fact, I'd say nearly always, it's not going to be a single action. That somebody who's a sexual predator is likely who's done sexual misconduct is unlikely to have just done it with one person, and somebody who's bullying or harassing, it's their mode of behaviour. So I think that the naming of the barrister, so that other people perhaps can see that there is an investigation and can come forward if they've got additional evidence. And then there is the question of protecting which is what this question was really focused at, which is protecting the identity of the person making the complaint. And that is very difficult indeed. And that is why I think talk to spot is so important, because talk to spot allows the person to record their complaint completely anonymously. But it's still important to do that because patterns can then be seen. So, for example, you could anonymously report that you've had an experience of bullying with a particular judge, and then if other people completely independently have made that same complaint and that information was available to the judicial leadership, then they could take action in that respect. So I think that talk to spot is an intermediate action before or instead of a full complaint, which allows the problem to be recorded, and that can maintain anonymity. So it's not a full pursuing a complaint, but it is actually recording it. But one of the things that I found most heartrending in this review is those who did make a complaint, partly because they felt that they were entitled to some accountability for the misconduct they'd been subjected to, and partly because they just had this feeling this shouldn't be allowed to happen. This is just not the way it should be. And therefore, they'd taken the big step of doing a complaint and then felt and said, I wish I never had made the complaint to the Bar Standards Board. I was never told what was going on. I was, cross-examined as if I was the person in the dock, that it went on for years, and then the sanction was just so minor. I think that the way that complainants are treated in the system, and the lack of support for them, and the lack of respect for the fact they're not doing something just for their own accountability, but they are needed to uphold the standards in the profession, I think requires a lot of action. It should be seen as public spirited to make a complaint, not somebody seen as a troublemaker. And that's why people are so terrified of their name getting out, because they feel they'll be shunned by other junior colleagues who are wanting to progress in the profession. They'll be shunned by the people in senior positions. They'll be known as a troublemaker, or if they complain about bullying, they'll be seen as weak. So I think that we have to shift the internal narrative, which is that those people who are complaining are not a nuisance. They are they're like whistleblowers. They're improving the standards and ethics of the bar and keeping it up to what it should be.
Yeah, I can see all of that, and I agree with you. I think that the reality is, Talk to Spot is a really useful tool, but it doesn't offer the road to redress. It'll gather the information, and at the point where you make a complaint to either the JCIO or the BSB, then you can't do it anonymously. So we have to be really clear about that. I think
your name will be published, but it will be known to the person you're complaining about. That's the problem. It won't be published. Yes.
Yeah, and I think the point you make, so a couple of points flowing from that, I think that the point you make, which is the reason for your recommendation 20, is that actually until there is a charging decision, both the complainant and the respondent to the complaint should be afforded that protection of confidentiality. That should be in place. I think also this goes to a broader point that at the moment, for as long as the jeopardy falls on the complainant, there will be this reluctance, and there will be the challenge that you will be known as a troublemaker. But what I hope is that as we use the recommendations and the roadmap to begin to change the culture, the desire where people face or witness bullying and harassment the desire to complain, that the need to complain and the ability to complain will be an easier one. At the moment, the culture is against the complainant. You set that very clearly in your report, and for as long as that remains the case, we'll have this reluctance. But my hope is that as we change the culture, as we have very clear lines about what is bullying, as we make very clear, as you say, none of us struggles with dishonesty and its impact on our careers. And so we must come to understand that this issue can also be career limiting or career ending. And I think once we do that, then there will be less anxiety. But at the moment, there is real anxiety, as there is in society, about people making these sorts of complaints. And people say all the time, well, what's the guarantee? As you say, it might take a long time. It might not be resolved positively, if at all. I might lose income along the way. Why on earth would I do this? So I think the onus is very squarely on our shoulders to do something about the culture in which we find ourselves. Let me go on to any more. I'm very mindful of the time, and I promised that I'd set out the steps Bar Council will take in terms of implementation. So let me just check all the various sources that I have to make sure I've answered or put all the questions to you. I think this is quite similar to one you've just been asked: how to safeguard the anonymity of whistleblowers, complainants and witnesses when there's a real threat of retaliation. I think you've dealt with that one. I think an interesting question. What would you say, Harriet, to somebody who is not in the profession yet, an aspiring barrister who reads your report and wonders whether it is a space that they want to enter into and work in? What would you say to them?
I would definitely recommend to anybody a profession, a career at the bar, because I think it's an incredibly important profession, and that I think that when the rules are recalibrated and coordinated, and the message goes clearly out about what the standards of behaviour are, that not only is a deterrent to those who've been committing misconduct to stop them doing it, but it's also a protection for those entering the profession, that they know what they can expect, that they know they can expect not to be bullied, not to be preyed on for sex, not to have people using LinkedIn as some sort of dating app, and that they will know with absolute clarity what they are entitled to expect. So I think that the important thing about the sort of setting forth the new approach is not only to the perpetrators, but also to shore up the confidence of the victims of misconduct. This is not normal. I mean, sometimes people have said, I was new at the bar. I had no idea how it was supposed to work. I didn't know whether this was the sort of normal way of behaviour of the sort of having to stay at the same hotel as my pupil supervisor, having to be in his room late at night. I had no idea whether that was the normal course of events or whether or not that was abnormal. I think actually ensuring that pupils and mini pupils absolutely know what they're entitled not to have to put up with, I think is very important indeed. But I would definitely encourage anybody to go into the profession. I think it's a fantastic profession. I mean, I think it's under a lot of pressure from public policy and lack of funding and all sorts of things which make it incredibly difficult job to do, but I think it's a really worthy thing to be doing.
I couldn't agree more. And to the person who asked the question, if you're an aspiring barrister from whatever background or whatever walk of life, you are most welcome. You shouldn't be worried at all about this issue now, because we have it very firmly in our grasp, as we have had for a number of years. So this is not a new issue for the Bar Council. As I said at the opening, when I made my opening remarks, we have been aware of the issue by reason of the working life surveys respondents that we've had for the last so many years. And the decision, this was no gotcha moment. This was our decision to look more carefully into this issue. We wanted to understand its root causes. We wanted to know what it is about our fantastic profession that was allowing this to happen. And we wanted to have a very clear roadmap. And not only have we got that now in this review, we have consensus amongst all those who have power to change the culture, to say, we agree and we will join you in that space to make the change that we need. And so you don't have to worry. We see you, we hear you, and we will make sure that you feel as safe and as protected as you can as you enter this profession. Let me then, as I promised, set out for you the steps that the Bar Council intends to take in relation to the review. As I said before, Bar Council has accepted and adopted all 36 recommendations. I'm pleased to say that in terms of implementation, we already have expertise and collateral within our executive team, and that can be built on to move quickly. You would have heard Harriet say that not only was she impressed with, is impressed with the Bar Council, she's particularly impressed with the team who will be seized to put this in place. We already have staff with expertise and knowledge on this agenda, and we've already recognised as a source of support and advice by barristers and chambers. So you're already asking us to come in and help you on these various issues. That will continue. A training product for all barristers and training for those in management is in place. Policy template is in place. We have already got an incident recording platform in Talk to Spot, and we've established a Stop It campaign. So we have more to do, but I assure you that the expertise, knowledge and experience is there to be built on. As a result of the review, we can boost those resources in the team by amending the existing collateral, amplifying the profile of the work undertaken, and clarify to you that we will, with speed, appoint the commissioner and extend, we hope, by working with the BSB, those parts of our code of conduct that requires us to take the necessary steps on this issue. We will, I could break it down to the various recommendations, but essentially the aim is that we will start working at pace. We will provide we have already provided a simple summary of the actions that chambers might be able to take as a result of the review. You don't have to wait for the commissioner to be appointed. You don't have to wait for Bar Council or the BSB to do its work. That the recommendations are there, and we encourage you to start thinking about it and working on your various constitutions. What Harriet says very clearly in her report is that it is important that there is as much uniformity across the profession as possible, so that as people move from one area to the other, they can't say, well, I didn't know you didn't do it quite like this here. So we would like there to be a degree of uniformity, and so we will provide policy and guidance, but it doesn't stop you from beginning to think about it and obviously tweak it as and when we have done the work. That is already in place, the simple summary. Training, we very much hope will be in place by the end of December. We very much hope that the following will be in place. Training, so the existing products that we have will be amended. There will be amendment of policy templates and guidance dealing with complaints. We will provide a guide to the making of complaints. There is some guidance, but they will be amended and beefed up effectively as a result of the recommendations. We will establish protocols for data sharing for safeguarding purposes. We will continue the communications campaign that we've embarked on, because you don't know what you don't know. So it's our job to make sure that we share the information, amplify the information, and make ourselves available. And the Sam Mercer's team remain available to you to ask questions as you go along. So all of that we very much hope will be done by the end of the year, as will the appointment of the Commissioner for Conduct. Really important, because as Harriet has set out, they will be a bridge, we hope, across the various stakeholders. They will be somebody that we hope heads of chambers, individuals can rely on. And we propose that that person will be able to work alongside the EDI team that is already working to good effect, and that commissioner will be in post at the very latest in January of next year. This is an issue that I am, as I said before, personally very committed in, for all the reasons. I've been at the bar for nearly 35 years. So as a practitioner, as a joint head of chambers and now chair of the bar, this is something that simply cannot go on. It has a devastating effect on those that experience and witness it. And, there is no space or room for it here. It doesn't sit at all comfortably with all the other things that we hold dear as barristers. And so I am very, very committed to changing it. And I very much hope that although our deadline for the commissioner to be in place is January, that I will see that through before the end of my term, which is the 31st of December. So all that is left for me to say, Harriet, is thank you very much again for dealing so comprehensively with the task we gave you in the review. Thank you for the respect and care that you have given to our profession, even as you came to see what you came to see and hear. And thank you very much for being available to us this evening to answer questions that colleagues have, and to ensure that they know all the things that I know, which is the care and attention that you've placed, and that there is no question other than your interest in the profession continuing to excel in the way that it has always done. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Barbara. It's been an absolute privilege to work with you and the Bar Council team and to work with the barristers profession. In another life, I definitely would have loved to have been a barrister. In fact, my mother qualified as the bar. She died in 2018 at the age of 100. But she had to give up. She was called to the bar, but she had to give up being a barrister when she married my father, because that was regarded as a higher ambition to be a housewife, to be a barrister. So her wig and gown was in my dressing up box. But I've always had a great admiration for the profession and wish it only well under your leadership to go forward on this.
Thank you. And I should also say to colleagues who've joined us, thank you very much for joining us at the end of what has no doubt already been a busy day, to hear Harriet speaking, to hear my commitment to this issue, and to hear all of the things that are the questions that are burning on you. So thank you very much for joining us. Harriet, I'll see you soon.
Bye.
Bye.